of New York is that there's so many talented people, but often they're isolated from one another. And if they could just meet each other, so many projects could get done. So anytime I recognize that someone's looking for someone that I know, I just can't help but connect them. It's really satisfying. So trade school is a barter school. Students pay teachers with barter items. With trade school, I think a lot of people wanted to teach because they were out of work and they wanted to demonstrate their value to a community that would help them understand how important what they do really is.
Sharing represents finally an opportunity to actually engage with people in the resourcing of everyday life. It's returning people back into the system of provisioning. So when I share from someone, rather than only having an engagement with product or with totally dehumanized retailers of those products, I now actually have to negotiate with people, with my neighbors, with my friends, with strangers. I need to negotiate to work out how to actually exchange these goods. So it returns the social to the economy.
This perceived need for speed is a big impediment to sharing. People don't have time, but what that means is that people don't think they have time. They don't prioritize organizing groups or connecting with other people, getting to understand other people to see if there are resources that they can share with one another.
What brings Not an Alternative together and our kind of deeper mission is to embolden and empower and kind of popularize where different people and different groups will confront the limits of what we call neoliberal capitalism. The way participation fits into that, and oftentimes sharing, has to do with basically incorporating and including everyone into participatory structures. And where our interest comes in is to think through and confront the limits of those participatory structures when they basically function as a trick to make it seem like we have democracy or make it seem like everyone is included when it's actually a facade to create exclusions. How can we use participation to get people to confront those limits, to push against the limits of participationism, like a fetish around participation, which has to do with sustaining given systems rather than pushing them to actualize their ideals.
This is where we do our sunrise stretches in the morning. The sun comes up right there. So it's nice to wake up and see the sun rise. A lot of artists in Williamsburg and Bushwick, around northern Brooklyn, live collectively so that they can save rent, or they pool resources in order to start a studio together. 7 people live here and 23 have studios where they just work. We buy everything in bulk so that it's not as expensive as it would be if you bought it organic at some giant place like Whole Foods. Some people think that the system is good, intrinsically good on its own, but actually the system is only as good as the people that are in the system. So everything that I do, I invite all of the nicest and most hardworking people I know to join me, and then they bring even better people, and it just is a bigger and bigger community of rigorous, generous people.
Sharing systems enable people with less to actually access resources without needing the full capital expenditure of ownership. So I think it could benefit in that way all the different constituencies of this community. The question is whether it's the same system, the wealthy sharing their stuff with the less wealthy, or whether they're parallel systems of sharing amongst communities of people who share some kind of social capital or ethnic base or some type of commonality. The big question is whether sharing occurs across groups of difference, whether sharing has diversity or not.
In the sharing economy, often it's neighbors helping neighbors, but we don't talk about what neighborhoods that sharing happens in. So often sharing is enabled by technology that's not accessible to a lot of people. So my goal would be to connect what I do with more low-income people.
We live essentially in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Greenpoint, which is kind of like the epicenter of hipsterdom in probably the US. It has a lot of cultural effect on the rest of this country. Our identification with the neighborhood was as hipsters. So our vision was to reimagine the hipster as a creative and useful character who could contribute to the neighborhood in productive ways, rather than the way the hipster is usually thought of, which is an ironic agent of gentrification, without any kind of understanding of the agency that they could have to affect their neighborhood. Talking to people, we saw that many just felt guilty about the fact that they were the reason why gentrification was happening.
I think the biggest opportunities for artists and creative people in North Brooklyn are to realize that they might stay here for longer than they thought they would. And if you are in a mentality where you think you're going to leave the city next year, you won't ever commit to the kinds of communities that could really fulfill you. So if you can be more intentional about the way you live in a neighborhood, you can build relationships that will satisfy you and help you get your work done and also be a more happy person because you'll commit to the location that you live in.